Hi, Wendy Murdoch here. Thanks for joining me for another edition of Reading from the Masters. Today I'm going to talk about Writing Logic by Museler. It's an interesting book, and I have had this book for quite a while. I checked the date inside and it's 876, so that's over 40 years ago. The thing about this book that I've been told is that the translation from German was quite poor. And so the concept that I want to discuss today is his use of the term bracing the back, or at least the English term bracing the back. And I'm not sure that we properly interpreted what Museler meant by that expression. So I wanted to cover that today and talk about what he says and then perhaps another way to interpret that information. All right. So I'm going to read what he has said here, and he's talking about back muscle action. Bracing the back, as the phrase is to be understood for the writer's purposes, is important for all influences and aids. So important indeed that it is hardly possible to give correct aids unless one properly masters this action. And he shows pictures of the person's back. He has the normal seat, the braced back, and the hollow back. And I'm just a little bit wondering, like when they show the braced back position, I'm wondering if that is actually the correct picture that they wanted. Because one of the things that I notice in this picture is that he is obviously opening the hip joint, and the arrow's pointing to the back here, and the lengthening. And so I'm actually thinking that, again, that this is the interpretation of the use of brace to the back is what we've got to talk about as opposed to how we write it today. So to continue, the feel for it can only be acquired by trying it out. So it's obvious right away he says that, you have to feel this. Only the horse and his own feel can tell the rider whether it has been tried out sufficiently, and as long as the rider does not notice the effect it has upon his horse, he has not acquired the feel for it. In other words, if you don't get the response from your horse, you're not doing it right. A feeling, however, excludes rigidity, and even bracing the back must never result in stiffness. So that's interesting, because right there he's saying it's not about stiffening the back. The muscles to be tightened are not the spinal muscles, as the anatomist would call them, but in the end it does not matter what muscles they are, as long as the rider has the right conception of the movement. So now he tells us, okay, you're not using your spinal muscles. I would interpret that as your back muscles, the muscles that run along the spine. But then he says that, it doesn't matter what muscles they are. So it's interesting to read this in relation to the what we read with Jean Saint-Fort Payard in terms of the role of the lower back. Because clearly they're all recognizing that the lower back is important. But we definitely get into this issue of how they want us to use it. To continue. At the normal position, the backbone or spine has a curved shape. When bracing the back, the lower end of the spine and the rump bone, os sacrum, which connects the spinal column with the pelvis bones, are pushed forward. The pelvis is thereby pivoted, being raised at the front and lowered at the rear, thus preventing the body from tilting forward. The gravest mistake is a hollow back, which has just the opposite effect, namely tilting the pelvis toward the front. Okay, so clearly a hollow back is bad. That means arching the back, top of the pelvis forward down, putting the pubic bone down toward the saddle. He has a picture of that saying, okay, that's not a good thing. Then he has the normal seat and the braced back and braced a bit more. And what we can see with the braced back position that's, I think, so important is to recognize how the hip angle has opened and that we have this lengthening connection between the thigh and the pelvis. The arrow points down here, which would cause many people, I think, to try and tighten their buttocks, but I do think that's a misinterpretation. In my opinion, what he's really talking about, and we'll see that in the exercises he refers to, is this idea of opening the hip instead of doing something with our back, hollowing, rounding, and I continue. Let's see. In practicing, the pupil can talk, whistle, and smoke, all of which will be useful in preventing rigidity. The movement proper is best studied by the following exercises. So basically it says you got to do these exercises to understand it. He gives 4 different exercises. The first one, bilateral tightening of the muscles. On the swing, the back is braced for forward swing and slackened for backward swing. So he has a picture of somebody riding a swing. And here again, I agree with this idea of opening the hip angle, which is coming from the support underneath, maintaining the alignment of the pelvis to the femur and extending the hip. And so that's an example using a swing motion I use when talking about rising trot. Okay, the second, if you lie down on the floor, you can only raise your buttocks by bracing the back, figure 7.7b, that's this one. And again, here we are opening the hip angle and having the alignment of the pelvis to the femur. So if any of you have ridden with me and I've put you in that standing posture where I've asked you to really open your hip, again, that's the same idea. And that's not coming from your back, that's coming from the muscle connection, keeping the seat bone aligned with the femur so that the hip opens. The next one, number 3, standing in front of a table with a book protruding over its edge, you can push the book onto the table without resorting to the hands just by bracing the back. So now we have this picture of pushing the book forward. Once again, opening the hip and moving the book and not hollowing. He says hollowing is wrong. This last comparison is a striking example of the difference between a braced back and a hollow back. Bracing the back pushes the buttocks forward, which is the main point of riding. And so when he talks about buttocks here, I would refer to it as not the muscles of the buttocks, but the pelvis. And yes, when you lengthen the front of the hip and engage the muscle below the glutes, which I call peaches, that opens that hip angle and keeps that pelvis in line with the femur. So bracing the back pushes the buttocks forward, which is the main point in riding, whereas a hollow back thrusts them out the rear. Bringing the chest forward and closing in the shoulder blades are mostly the result of a hollow back. So the chest going forward and closing in the shoulder blades, which I'm not even sure what he means by that other than maybe hollowing and pulling them back. 4, if you sit on a chair leaning against its back, you can slide your thighs and buttocks forward by bracing your back. Okay, so here's this picture of sitting on the chair, but this is the one that I really like. This picture here, the lower one, because that I use all the time in terms of rocking a chair forward. And again, you can't do that by tightening your glutes. You've got to do that by engaging the muscles that are going to keep the pelvis in line with the femur to open the hip angle. 5, if you straddle a light stool, and this is the one that he's referring to here, if you straddle a light stool or paper basket or similar objects, mounting block even, you can easily tilt it by bracing the back. It is, of course, essential that the legs should not rest on the floor in front of the line of gravity, but to the right and left of it. So he wants the feet a little bit wider. In this way, you can even tilt a heavy chair if you sit far enough forward. So if you sit far enough forward on the chair, you can open the hip. Again, any of you who've ridden with me, we've done this exercise either on an exercise ball or on a chair, depending on what I have available, to show you how to open that hip angle and bring the pelvis forward. The pelvis coming forward over your foot is the key to stability in the saddle, especially in the rising trot. Do not be satisfied with reading these explanations and looking at the pictures, for although they will help you to understand the movement, you will not have yet felt it. You must try it out. Even if you have a definite feel for this bracing in the back, it still needs special practice on horseback to enable you to use it at the best advantage in riding. And the thing you have to realize in riding is this is not going to be a huge movement. The lengthening of the front of the thigh, the opening of the hip, and the pelvis coming forward to stay over the foot is small because you're sitting on the saddle. And the whole idea is that as you make that movement, the horse comes through from behind into your hand. So bracing the back is just as easy or just as difficult to understand and learn in the first few lessons as later on. The loin or back muscles can be tightened in various degrees like all other muscles, and aids can therefore be given with more or less action of the loins. It is possible to brace or tighten the back muscles very strongly and thereby to push the buttocks forward, but it is also possible to brace the back just sufficiently to prevent one from sliding backward in the saddle. All this must be tried out so that it can be put into actual practice instead of remaining an empty phrase. Never forget that bracing the back is the basis of adjusting the seat, of walking and trotting on, and of executing a parade. Without back muscle action, effective aids are impossible, and each halt will be just a pull up the reins. Without the back muscle action, a good seat is impossible, and lack of this elementary basis is the primary cause of all bad habits in a horse. So, he's saying how important this is to use your back correctly. He's giving us various exercises, which I actually think are good exercises. But the words kind of jumble around and aren't clear. That's where I go back to Jean-Sébastien Paillard and look at his description of the role of the lower back, which I find much more clear to me. And we're going to talk more about the lower back, I'm sure, as we go through different parts of books. Finally, it says the most common mistakes which are made in connection with this back muscle action are: 1. Most riders believe that it is not necessary to try out these movements on foot, but that it is sufficient to have grasped the idea. The result is that when they get into the saddle, they lack the proper feel and do not know which muscles to put into action. So if any of you have taken my Effortless Rider course, you're going to recognize this one with the chair because we've done that one. 2. Most riders do not sufficiently practice this action as a proper exercise on horseback. The feel for it can only be acquired by continuous concentration when walking on, trotting on, or making a parade. At the same time, of course, the thighs ought never be forgotten and should always have close contact with the horse. If this feel does not come on one horse, the only course is to change horses until you've finally felt it. So he's like, go to a different horse and try it again. We often hear that a rider has a lot of backbone or that he has no back. These expressions are misleading. All riders have more or less the same amount of back, but they do not all know equally well how to operate with it. Most people have sufficient muscle strength so that they can be a little danger of overexerting by undue use of these muscles, so don't do too much. Real back aches are something entirely different. They can be caused by the rider getting too much bumping or by too long a lesson. Such pains, however, can hardly be put down to too strong an action of the back muscles. So I'm going to go to the pictures that he has here now, and here's the chair exercise, and then he demonstrates it on the horse, and then again he demonstrates pushing the book forward. But I think the thing to remember here, actually most importantly, is what we see on the chair, because now we get the knee going forward down in the hip opening. And of course, if you've ridden with me, my third rule is knees forward down, and here we are. So think about that. How does bracing the back, how do you interpret that? What does bracing the back mean to you, and how have you been riding that? And leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of this talk, and if you have any comments or questions, just leave a comment and I'll be sure to answer those. All right, take care. Bye.